Alright, guys, so East of Eden, chapter 17. When I said Kathy was a monster, it seemed to me that it was so. Now I have bent close with the glass over the small print of her and reread the footnotes, and I wonder if it was true. The trouble is that since we cannot know what she wanted, we will never know whether or not she got it. If rather than running towards something, she ran away from something, we can't know whether she escaped. Who knows but that she tried to tell someone or everyone what she was like and could not, for lack of a common language. Her life may have been her language, formal, developed, indecipherable. It is easy to say she was bad, but there was little meaning unless we know why. I've built the image in my mind of Kathy sitting quietly waiting for her pregnancy to be over, living on a farm she did not like with a man she did not love. She sat in her chair under the oak tree, her hands clasped to each in love and shelter. She sat in her chair under the oak tree, her hands clasped each to each in love and shelter. She grew very big, abnormally big, even at a time when women gloried in big babies and counted extra pounds with pride. She was misshapen, or she was misshaping. Her belly tight and heavy and distended made it impossible for her to stand without supporting herself with her hands. But the great lump was local. Shoulders, neck, arms, hands, face were unaffected, slender and girlish. Her breasts did not grow and her nipples did not darken. There was no quickening of milk glands, no physical planning to feed the newborn. When she sat behind a table, you could not see that she was pregnant at all. In that day, there was no measuring of pelvic arc, no testing of blood, no building with calcium. A woman gave a tooth for a child, it was the law, and a woman was likely to have strange tastes, some said for filth, and it was set down to the Eve, nature still under sentence for original sin. Kathy's odd appetite was simple compared to some. The carpenters repairing the old house complained that they could not keep the lumps of chalk with which they coated their chalk lines. Again and again the scored hunks disappeared. Kathy stole them and broke them into little pieces. She carried the chips in her apron pocket, and when no one was about, she crushed a soft lime between her teeth. She spoke very little. Her eyes were remote. It was as though she had gone away, leaving a breathing doll to conceal her absence. Activity surged around her. Adam went happily about building and planning his Eden. Samuel and his boys brought in a well at 40 feet and put down the newfangled expensive metal casing, for Adam wanted the best. The Hamiltons moved their rig and started another hole. They slept in a tent beside the work and cooked over a campfire, but there was always one or another of them riding home for a tool or with a message. Adam fluttered like a bewildered bee, confused by too many flowers. He sat by Kathy and chatted about the pipe plant roots just come in. He sketched for her the new fan blade Samuel had invented for the windmill. It had a variable pitch and was an unheard of thing. He rode out to the well rig and slowed the work with his interest, and naturally, as he discussed wells with Kathy, his talk was all of birth and child care at the wellhead. It was a good time for Adam, the best time. He was the king of his wide and spacious life. And summer passed into a hot and fragrant autumn. The Hamiltons at the well rig had finished their lunch of Liza's bread and rat cheese and venomous coffee, cooked in a can over the fire. Joe's eyes were heavy, and he was considering how he could get away into the brush to sleep for a while. Samuel knelt in the sandy soil, looking at the torn and broken edges of his bit. Just before they had stopped for lunch, the drill had found something 30 feet down that had mangled the steel as though it were lead. Samuel scraped the edge of the blade with his pocket knife and inspected the scrapings in the palm of his hand. His eyes were shone with a childlike excitement. He held out his hand and poured the scrapings into Tom's hand. "Take a look at it, son. What do you think of it?" "What do you think it is?" Joe wandered over from his place in front of the tent. Tom studied the fragments in his hand. "Whatever it is, it's hard," he said. "Couldn't it be a diamond that big? Looks like metal. Do you think we've bored into a buried locomotive?" His father laughed. 30 feet down," he said admiringly. "It looks like tool steel," said Tom. "We haven't got anything that can touch it." Then he saw the faraway joyous look on his father's face, and a shiver of shared delight came to him. The Hamilton children loved it when their father's mind went free. Then the world was peopled with wonders. Samuel said, "Metal, you say? You think steel, Tom? I'm going to make a guess, and then I'm going to get a say. Now hear my guess and remember it. I think we'll find nickel in it, and silver maybe, and carbon and manganese. How I would like to dig it up. It's in a sea sand." It's in sea sand. That's what we've been getting. Tom said, Say, what do you think it is with? Nickel and silver? It must have been long thousands centuries ago, Samuel said, and his sons knew he was seeing it. Maybe it was all water here. An inland sea with the seabirds circling and crying, and it would have been a pretty thing if it happened at night. There would come a line of light, and then a pencil of white light, and then a tree of blinding light drawn in a long arc from heaven. Then there would be a great water spout and a big mushroom of steam, and your ears would be staggered by the sound because the soaring cry of its coming would be on you at the same time the water exploded. And then it would be black night again because of the blinding light, and gradually you'd see the killed fish coming up, showing silver in the starlight, and the crying birds would come to eat them. It's a lonely, lovely thing to think about, isn't it? He made them see it as he always did. Tom said softly, "You think it's a meteorite, don't you?" "That I do, and we can prove it by assay." Joe said eagerly, "Let's dig it up." "You dig it, Joe, while we bore for water." Tom said seriously, If the assay showed enough nickel and silver, wouldn't it pay to mine it?" "You're my own son," said Samuel. "We don't know whether it's big as a house or little as a hat. But we could probe down and see." "That we could if we did it secretly and hid our thinking under a pot." "Why, what do you mean?" "Now, Tom, have you no kindness toward your mother? We give her enough trouble, son. She's told me plain that if I spend any more money patenting things, she'll give us trouble to remember. Have pity on her. Can't you see her shame when they ask her what we're doing? She's a truthful woman, your mother. She'd have to say, 'They're at digging up a star.'" He laughed happily. "She'd never live it down, and she'd make us smart. No pies for 3 months. Tom said, "We can't get through it. We'll have to move to another place." Sorry about that. "I'll put some blasting powder down," said his father, "and if that doesn't crack it aside, we'll start a new hole." He stood up. "I'll have to go home for powder and to sharpen the drill. Why don't you boys ride along with me, and we'll give Mother a surprise so that she'll cook the whole night and complain. That way she'll disassemble her pleasure." Joe said, "Somebody's coming fast," and indeed they could see a horseman riding toward them at full gallop, but a curious horseman who flopped about on his mount like a tied chicken. When he came a little closer, they saw that it was Lee, his elbows waving like wings, his queue lashing about like a snake. It was surprising that he stayed on at all and still drove the horse at full tilt. He pulled up, breathing heavily. "Missy Adams say come. Missy Kathy bad. Come quick." Missy yell, scream. Samuel said, "Hold on, Lee. When did it start?" "Maybe breakfast time." "All right, calm yourself. How is it? How is Adam?" "Missy Adam crazy. Cly laugh, make vomit." "Sure," said Samuel. "These new fathers. I was once one." "Tom, throw a saddle on for me, will you?" Joe said. "What is it?" "Why, Mrs. Trask is about to have her baby. I told Adam I stand by." "You?" Joe asked. Samuel leveled his eyes on his youngest son. "I brought both of you into the world," he said, "and you've given no evidence you think I did a bad service to the world." Tom, you get all the tools gathered up. And go back to the ranch and sharpen the metal. Bring back the box of powder that's on the shelf in the tool shed and go easy with it as you love your arms and legs. Joe, I want you to stay here and look after things," Joe said plaintively. "But what will I do here alone?" Samuel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Joe, do you love me?" "Why, sure. If you heard I committed some great crime, would you turn me over to the police?" "What are you talking about? Would you?" "No." "All right, then. In my basket under my clothes you'll find 2 books. New, so be gentle with them. It's 2 volumes by a man the world is going to hear from. You can start reading it if you want it. And it will raise up your lid a little. It's called The Principles of Psychology, and it's by an Eastern man named William James, no relative to the train robber. And Joe, if you ever let on about the books, I'll run you off the ranch. If your mother ever found out I spent the money on them, she'd run me off the ranch." Tom led his saddled horse to him. "Can I read it next?" "Yes," said Samuel, and he slipped his leg tightly over the saddle. "Come on, Lee." The Chinese wanted to break into a gallop, but Samuel restrained him. "Take it easy, Lee. Birthing takes longer than you think, mostly." For a time they rode in silence, and then Lee said, "I'm sorry you bought those books. I have the condensed form in 1 volume, the textbook. You could have borrowed it." "Have you now? Do you have many books?" "Not many here, 30 or 40, but you're welcome to any of them you haven't read." "Thank you, Lee. And you may be sure I'll look the first moment I can, you know. You could talk to my boys. Joe's a little flighty, but Tom's all right, and it would do him good." "It's a hard bridge to cross, Mr. Hamilton. Makes me timid to talk to a new person, but I'll try if you say so." They walked the horses rapidly toward the little draw of the Trask place. Samuel said, "Tell me, how is it with the mother?" I'd rather you saw for yourself and thought for yourself, Lee said. You know, when a man lives alone as much as I do, his mind can go off on an irrational tangent just because his social world is out of kilter. Yes, I know, but I'm not lonely and I'm on a tangent too, but maybe not the same one. You don't think I imagined it then? I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you for your reassurance that I have a sense of strangeness. I guess that's all it is with me too, said Lee. He smiled. I'll tell you how far it got with me though. Since I've come here, I find myself thinking of Chinese fairy tales my father told me. We Chinese have a well-developed demonology. You think she is a demon? Of course not, said Lee. I hope I'm a little beyond such silliness. I don't know what it is. You know, Mr. Hamilton, a servant develops an ability to taste the wind and judge the climate of the house he works in. And there's a strangeness here. Maybe that's what makes me remember my father's demons. Did your father believe in them? Oh no, he thought I should know the background. You Occidentals perpetuate a good many myths too, Samuel said. Tell me what happened to set you off this morning, I mean. If you weren't coming, I would try, said Lee, but I would rather not. You can see for yourself. I may be crazy, of course. Mr. Adam is strung so tight he may snap like a banjo string. Give me a little hint, it might save time. What did she do? Nothing. That's just it, Mr. Hamilton. I've been outbursts before, a good many of them, but this is something new to me. How? Well, I'll tell you the one thing I can think of. This is much more like a bitter, deadly combat than a birth. As they rode into the draw and under the oak trees, Samuel said, I hope you haven't got me in a state, Lee. It's a strange day, and I don't know why. No wind, said Lee. It's the first day in a month when there hasn't been wind in the afternoon. That's so. You know, I've been so close to the details, I pay no attention to the closing of the day. First we find a buried star, and now we go to dig up a new human. He looked up through the oak branches at the yellow-lit hills. What a beautiful day to be born in, he said. If signs have their fingers on a life, it's sweet life coming. And Lee, if Adam plays true, he'll be in the way. Stay close, will you? In case I need something. Look, the carpenters are sitting under the tree. Sitting under that tree. Mr. Adam stopped the work. He thought the hammering might disturb his wife. Samuel said, you stay close. That sounds like Adam playing true. He doesn't know his wife probably couldn't hear God himself beating a tattoo on the sky. The workman sitting under the tree waved to him. How do, Mr. Hamilton? How's your family? Fine, fine. Say, isn't that Rabbit Holman? Where you been, Rabbit? Went prospecting, Mr. Hamilton. Find anything, Rabbit? Hell, Mr. Hamilton, I couldn't even find the mule I went out with. They rode on toward the house, Lee said quickly. If you ever get a minute, I'd like to show you something. What is it, Lee? Well, I've been trying to translate some old Chinese poetry into English. I'm not sure it can be done. Will you take a look? I'd like to, Lee. Why? That would be a treat for me. So that's part 2 of that chapter. I just want to go back and The Principles of Psychology by William James. I gotta remember that. So Kathy's pregnant, but something's going on. Hope she doesn't have a miscarriage. So Bordoni's white frame house was very quiet, almost broodingly quiet, and the shades were pulled down. Samuel dismounted at the stoop, untied his bulging saddlebags, and gave his horse to Lee. He knocked and got no answer and went in. It was dusky in the living room after the outside light. He looked in the kitchen, scrubbed to the wood grain by Lee. A gray stoneware Palone coffee pot grunted on the back of the stove. Samuel tapped lightly on the bedroom door and went in. It was almost pitch black inside, for not only were the shades down, but the blankets were tacked over the windows. Kathy was lying in the big 4-poster bed, and Adam sat beside her, his face buried in the coverlet. He raised his head and looked blindly out. Samuel said pleasantly, "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Adam's voice was hoarse. "She doesn't want the light. It hurts her eyes." Samuel walked into the room, and authority grew in him with each step. "There will have to be light," he said. "She can close her eyes. I'll tie a black cloth over them if she wants." He moved to the window and grasped the blanket to pull it down, but Adam was upon him before he could yank. "Leave it. The light hurts her," he said fiercely. Samuel turned on him. "Now, Adam, I know what you feel. I promised you I'd take care of things, and I will. Only hope one of those things isn't you." He pulled the blanket down and rolled up the shade to let the golden afternoon light in. Kathy made a little mewing sound from the bed, and Adam went to her. "Close your eyes, dear. I'll put a cloth over your eyes." Samuel dropped his saddlebags in a chair and stood beside the bed. "Adam," he said firmly, "I'm going to ask you to go out of the room and stay out." "No, I can't." "Why?" "Because I don't want you in the way. It's considered a sweet practice for you to get drunk." "I couldn't," Samuel said. "Anger's a slow thing in me, and disgust is slower, but I can taste the beginnings of both of them. You'll get out of the room and give me no trouble, or I'll go away, and you'll have a basket of trouble." Adam went finally. From the doorway, Samuel called, "And I don't want you bursting in if you hear anything. You wait for me to come out." He closed the door, noticed there was a key in the lock, and turned it. "He's an upset, vehement man," he said. "He loves you." He had not looked at her closely until now, and he saw true hatred in her eyes, unforgiving, murderous hatred. "It'll be over before long, dearie. Now tell me, has the water broke?" Her hostile eyes glared at him, and her lips raised, snarling from her little teeth. She did not answer him. He stared at her. "I did not come by choice except as a friend," he said. "It's not a pleasure to me, young woman. I don't know your trouble, and minute by minute I don't care. Maybe I can save you some. Maybe I can save you some pain. Who knows? I'm going to ask you one more question. If you don't answer, if you put that snarling look on me, I'm going out and leave you to welter." The words struck into her understanding like lead shot dropped in water. She made a great effort and gave him a shivering to see her face change, the steel leave her eyes, the lips thicken from line to bow, and the corners turn up. He noticed the movement of her hands, the fists unclenched and the fingers turned pinky upward. Her face became young and innocent and bravely hurt. It was like one magic lantern slide taking the place of another. She said softly, "The water broke at dawn." "That's better. Have you had hard labor?" "Yes." "How far apart?" "I don't know." "Well, I've been in this room 15 minutes. I've had 2 little ones, no big ones since you came." "Fine. Now where's your linen?" "In the hamper over there." "You'll be all right, dearie," he said gently. He opened his saddlebags and took out a thick rope covered with blue velvet and looped at either end. On the velvet hundreds of little pink flowers were embroidered. "Liza sent you her pulling rope to use," he said. "She made it when our firstborn was preparing. What with our children and friends, this rope has pulled a great number of people into the world." He slipped one of the loops over each of the footposts of the bed. Suddenly her eyes glazed and her back arched like a spring, and the blood started to her cheeks. He waited for her to cry or scream and looked apprehensively at the closed door, but there was no scream, only a series of grunting squeals. After a few seconds her body relaxed and the hatefulness was back in her face. The labor struck again. "There's a dear," he said soothingly. "Was it 1 or 2? I don't know. The more you see, the more you learn. No 2 are alike. I better get my hands washed." Her head threshed from side to side. Good, my darling," he said. "I think it won't be long till your baby's here." He put his hand on her forehead where her scars showed dark and angry. "How did you get the hurt on your head?" he asked. Her head jerked up and her sharp teeth fastened on his hand across the back and up into the palm near the little finger. He cried out in pain and tried to pull his hand away, but her jaw was set and her head twisted and turned, mangling his hand the way a terrier worries a sack. A shrill snarling came from her set teeth. He slapped her on the cheek and it had no effect. Crazy girl. Automatically he did what he would have done to stop a dogfight. His left hand went to her throat and he cut off her wind. She struggled and tore at his hand before her jaws unclenched and he pulled his hand free. The flesh was torn and bleeding. He stepped back from the bed and looked at the damage her teeth had done. He looked at her with fear, and when he looked, her face was calm again and young and innocent. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Oh, I'm sorry." Samuel shuddered. "It was the pain," she said. Samuel laughed shortly. "I'll have to muzzle you, I guess," he said. "A collie bitch did the same to me once." He saw the hatred look out of her eyes for a second and then retreat. Samuel said, "Have you got anything to put on it? Humans are more poisonous than snakes." "I don't know." "Well, have you got any whiskey? I'll pour some whiskey on it." In the second drawer. He splashed whiskey on his bleeding hand and kneaded the flesh against the alcohol sting. A strong quaking was in his stomach and a sickness rose up against his eyes. He took a swallow of whiskey to steady himself. He dreaded to look back at the bed. "My hand won't be much good for a while," he said. Samuel told Adam afterwards, "She must be made of whalebone. The birth happened before I was ready, popped like a seed. I knocked the water ready to wash, and why, she didn't even touch the pulling rope to bear down. Pure whalebone she is." He tore out the door, called Lee, and demanded warm water. Adam came charging into the room. "A boy," Samuel cried. "You've got a boy." "Easy," he said, for Adam had seen the mess in the bed, and a green was rising in his face. Samuel said, "Send Lee in here, and you, Adam, if you still have the authority to tell your hands and feet what to do, get to the kitchen and make me some coffee, and see the lamps are filled and the chimneys clean." Adam turned like a zombie and left the room. In a moment Lee looked in. Samuel pointed to the bundle in a laundry basket. "Sponge him off in warm water, Lee. Don't let a draft get on him. Lord, I wish Liza were here. I can't do everything at once." He turned back to the bed. "Now, dearie, I'll get you cleaned up." Kathy was bowed again, snarling in her pain. "It'll be over in a little," he said. "Takes a little time for the residue, and you're so quick. Why, you didn't even have to pull on Liza's rope." He saw something, stared, and went quickly to work. "Lord God in heaven, it's another one. I have twins." He worked fast, and as with the first, the birth was incredibly quick, and again Samuel tied the cord. Lee took the second baby, washed it, wrapped it, and put it in the basket. Samuel cleaned the mother and shifted her gently while she changed the linen on the bed, or while he changed the linen. He found in himself a reluctance to look in her face. He worked as quickly as he could, for his bitten hand was stiffening. He drew a clean white sheet up to her chin and raised her to slip a fresh pillow under her head. At last he had a look at her. Her golden hair was wet with perspiration, but her face had changed. It was stony, expressionless. At her throat, the pulse fluttered visibly. "You have 2 sons," Samuel said. "2 fine sons. They aren't alike, each one born separate in his own sack." She inspected him coldly and without interest. Samuel said, "I'll show your boys to you." "No," she said without emphasis. "Now, dearie, don't you want to see your sons?" "No, I don't want them." "Oh, you'll change. You're tired now, but you'll change. And I'll tell you now, this birth was quicker and easier than I ever seen ever in my life." The eyes moved from his face. "I don't want them. I want you to cover the windows and take the light away. It's weariness. In a few days you'll feel so different you won't remember." "I'll remember. Go away. Take them out of the room. Send Adam in." Samuel was caught by her tone. There was no sickness, no weariness, no softness. His words came out without his will. "I don't like you," he said, and wished he could gather the words back into his throat and into his mind, but his words had no effect on Kathy. "Send Adam in," she said. She's going to tell him, watch, that she fucked his brother. In the little living room, Adam looked vaguely at his sons and went quickly into the bedroom and shut the door. In a moment came the sound of tapping. Adam was nailing the blankets over the windows again. Lee brought coffee to Samuel. "That's a bad-looking hand you have there," he said. "I know. I'm afraid it's going to give me trouble." "Why did she do it?" "I don't know. She's a strange thing." Lee said, "Mr. Hamilton, let me take care of that. You could lose an arm." The life went out of Samuel. "Do what you want, Lee. Your frightened sorrow has closed down over my heart. I wish I were a child so I could cry. I'm too old to be afraid like this, and I've now felt such despair since a bird died in my hand by a flowing water long ago." Lee left the room and shortly returned, carrying a small ebony box carved with twisting dragons. He sat by Samuel and from his box took a wedge-shaped Chinese razor. "It will hurt," he said softly. "I'll try to bear it, Lee." The Chinese bit his lips, feeling the inflicted pain in himself while he cut deeply into the hand, opened the flesh around the tooth marks front and back, and trimmed the ragged flesh away until good red blood flowed from every wound. He shook a bottle of yellow emulsion labeled Hall's Cream Salve and poured it into the deep cuts. He saturated a handkerchief with the salve and wrapped the hand. Samuel winced and gripped the chair arm with his good hand. "It's mostly carbolic acid," Lee said. "You can smell it." "Thank you, Lee. I'm being a baby to knot up like this." "I don't think I could have been so quiet," said Lee. "I'll get you another cup of coffee." He came back with 2 cups and sat down by Samuel. "I think I'll go away," he said. "I never went willingly to a slaughterhouse." Samuel stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." The words came out. Samuel shivered. "Lee, men are fools. I guess I hadn't thought about it, but Chinese men are fools too." "What made you doubt it?" "Oh, maybe because we think of strangers as stronger and better than we are." "What do you want to say?" Samuel said, "Maybe the foolishness is necessary, the dragon fighting, the boasting, the pitiful courage to be constantly knocking a chip off God's shoulder, and the childish cowardice that makes a ghost, a dead tree beside a darkening road. Maybe that's good and necessary, but—" "What do you want to see?" Lee repeated patiently. "I thought some wind had blown up the embers in my foolish mind," Samuel said. "And now I hear in your voice that you have it too. I feel wings over this house. I feel a dreadfulness coming. I feel it too. I know you do, and that makes me take less than my usual comfort in my foolishness. This birth was too quick, too easy, like a cat having kittens. And I fear for these kittens. I have dreadful thoughts gnawing to get into my brain." "What do you want to say?" Lee asked the 3rd time. "I want my wife